up, everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in. No, we're not gonna stop until we reach it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We all have our reasons why we are on this track. Oh, we all have our burdens, yeah, but we just keep on fighting and we never look back. Here we go, 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 let us heal and grow. You won't be alone, we're unstoppable. Don't be afraid to show what we're going for. This is what we know. Here we come back to life, we're still breathing. Standing up, everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in. No, we're not gonna stop until we reach it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne.
Okay, shall we get started here?
Rise up from the dust and claim our
I
throne.
think so. Okay, that's enough of that. It's getting to be about time to change that music out again, I think. Okay, so um, getting to Trust Me, I'm Lying, and we are starting into Book 2. So, the monsters attack. What blogs mean? And so this is going to be chapter 13 to start off with. Let me get my spectacles on here, and I'll settle back in, and we'll get to reading here. All right, chapter 13. Irin. It's Irin. So how do you pronounce that? Carmen, The Daily Show, and Me. I don't know how you pronounce that. I would say Irin, but who knows these days? Okay, the perfect storm of how toxic blogging can be. And we have a quote. um, Most crucially, that machine, whether it churns through social media or television appearances, doesn't reward bipartisanship or deal making. It rewards the easily retweetable or soundbite ready statement or soundbite ready statement. The more outrageous, the better. Irene Carmen Jezebel. Okay. In the first half of this book, you saw the inside view of how to manipulate blogs. There are fatal flaws in the blogging medium that create opportunities for influence over the media and ultimately culture itself. If I were writing this book as a much younger man, it would have ended there. I did not fully understand the dangers of that world then, but I began to feel they were there. The costs of the cheap power I had in it were hidden, but once revealed, I could not shake them. I had used my tactics to sell T-shirts and books, but others I found used them more expertly and to more ominous ends. They sold everything from presidential candidates to distractions they hoped would placate the public and made or destroyed millions of dollars in the process. Realizing all this changed me. It made it impossible for me to continue down the path that I was on. The second half of this book explains why. It is an investigation not of how the dark arts of media manipulation work, but of their consequences. How blogs create their own narratives for fun and profit. In 2010, I oversaw the launch of a new line of a made in USA environmentally friendly nail polish for American Apparel. Although American Apparel typically manufactures all of its products at its vertically integrated factory in LA, for this product we'd collaborated with an old fashioned family owned factory in Long Island, where even the 90-year-old grandmother still worked on the factory floor. Shortly after shipping the polish to rave reviews, we noticed that several bottles had cracked or burst underneath the bright halogen lights in our stores. It didn't pose a risk to our customers, but to be safe rather than sorry, we informed the factory that we'd be pulling the polish from store shelves and expected immediate replacements. We'd discussed the plan in depth on a weekly conference call with our relevant employees. A confidential email was sent to store managers informing them of the changes and asking them to place the bottles in a cool, dry place in the store until instructions for proper disposal were given. The last thing we wanted, even with environmentally friendly nail polish, was to throw 50,000 bottles of it in trash cans in 20 countries. Jezebel blogger Erin Carmen somehow received this innocent internal communication and emailed me at 6:25 a.m. West Coast time. They're based in Manhattan to ask about it. Well, she pretended to ask me about it since she signed her email with the following quote, "Our post with the initial information is going up shortly, but I would be more than happy to update our post or post a follow-up. Thanks so much, Erin." End quote. By the time I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and the post was already live. When I saw it, all I could feel was a pit in my stomach, and frankly, that surprised me. I knew how blogs worked, was plenty cynical, but even then I sensed that this would be awful. The headline of Jezebel's piece, "Does American Apparel's New Nail Polish Contain Hazardous Material?" To settle Jezebel's reckless conjecture, the answer is no, it didn't. Unequivocally no. And remember, most headlines with questions in them can be answered that way. For starters, the leaked email specifically said the problem was with the glassware and mentioned nothing about the polish. But Carmen wasn't actually interested in any of that, and she definitely wasn't interested in writing an article that addressed the issue fairly. Why would she want an actual answer to an incredibly disingenuous question? The post was already written. Hell, it was already published. As I had not intended to discuss the nail polish bottles publicly yet, it took about an hour for me to get a statement approved by the company lawyers. During that time, dozens of other blogs were already parroting her claims. Major blogs, many of which had posted positive reviews of the nail polish on their sites, followed her bogus lead. The story was so compelling. American Apparel, toxic polish, exploding glass. They had to run with it, true or not. Within about an hour, I emailed the following statement to Carmen, thinking I was taking her up on the offer for a follow up to her first post. And this is a very long quote. Quote, "After receiving a few reports of bottles breaking, we made the internal decision to do a voluntary recall of the bottles on both a retail and public level. We chose this small U.S. manufacturer to produce our nail polish because we support their business model and have a fondness for the family who runs it. However, one of the realities of all manufacturing is first run glitches. We worked all last week with the manufacturer to make the improvements necessary for the second run. Another reason we sought out a US based company is so we would be able to make changes, and now we can investigate what went wrong as quickly as possible. We still believe in the factory we're working with, and the new polish will be in stores within the next 2 weeks. We will offer an exchange of 2 new bottles or a $10 gift card for anyone who brings in a unit from the original run or a receipt. On another note, one thing we're taking very seriously is the disposal of the bottles we had in the stores. Even though our polish was DPB toluene and formaldehyde free, We don't want our stores just tossing it in the trash. We're using our internal shipping and distribution line to arrange a pickup and removal of the polish to make sure it gets done right. End quote. I felt this was a great and ethical response, but it was too late. Carmen copied and pasted my statement to the bottom of the article and left the headline exactly as it was, adding only updated to the end of it, even though the statement disproved the premise of her article. Carmen's implication was that she was mostly right and was just adding a few new details. She wasn't. She'd been totally wrong, but it didn't matter because the opportunity to change the readers' minds had passed. The facts had been established. To make matters worse, Carmen replied to my last email with a question about another trumped up story she planned to write about the company. She ended again with, quote, by the way, just FYI, I'd love to be able to include your responses in my initial post, but unfortunately, I won't be able to wait for them. So if this is something you can immediately react to, that would be great, end quote. The controversy eventually meant the undoing of the nail polish company we'd worked so hard to support. Had these blogs not rushed to print a bogus story, the problem could have been handled privately. The massive outcry that followed Carmen's post necessitated an immediate and large scale response that the cosmetic company could not handle. No question they'd made mistakes, but nothing remotely close to what was reported. Overwhelmed by the controversy of the pressure from the misplaced anger of the blogger horde, the small manufacturer fell behind on their orders. Their operations fell into disarray, and the company was later sued by American Apparel for $5 million in damages to recover various losses. As the lawyers would say, while the nail polish company is responsible for their manufacturing errors, if not for Carmen's needless attack and rush to judgment, the proximate cause, it all could have been worked out. Carmen is a media manipulator. She just doesn't know it. She may think she is a writer, but everything about her job makes her a media manipulator. She and I are in the same racket. From the twisting of the facts to the creation of a non existent story to the merciless use of attention for profit, she does what I do, what any media manipulator attempting to monetize attention does. Yet people think that journalists are universally good guys. No, we don't. We most definitely do not. Most of them are nothing but hacks and whores. A pattern of manipulation. Did you know that The Daily Show with Jon Stewart hated women and that they had a long history of discriminating against and firing women? Sure, one of its co-creators was female, and one of its best known and longest running correspondents was a woman, and now the host of her own show, and there really isn't any evidence to prove that what I just claimed, but that wouldn't stop someone from writing a story with that sensational angle if they could. And so it went that the story with that exact conceit from Jezebel slammed into The Daily Show in June 2010. Aaron Carmen's piece blindsided him just as her Jezebel nail polish story had blindsided us. It began when Carmen posted an article titled The Daily Show's Woman Problem. Relying on some juicy quotes from people no longer with the show, Carmen claimed that the show had a poor record of finding and developing female comedic talent. It was also determined to, she was also determined to make a name for herself, as you should expect by now. The article was a sensation. In order to accomplish this, she didn't actually speak to anyone who still worked for The Daily Show. It was much easier to use a collection of anonymous and off-the-record sources, like an ex-employee who hadn't worked there for 8 years. The cluster of stories that followed were read more than 500,000 times. The story was picked up by ABC News, The Huffington Post, The Wall Street Journal, Salon, and others. In a memo to his staff, Carmen's boss and the publisher of Gawker, Nick Denton, commended the story for getting the kind of publicity that can't be bought. Denton wrote, quote, "It was widely circulated within the media, spawned several more discussions, and affirmed our status as both an influencer and a muckraker." End quote. Jon Stewart was even forced to respond to the story on air. The New York Times rewarded Carmen and the website with a glowing profile. Quote, "A website that's not afraid to pick a fight," end quote. Yeah, it's easy to pick fights when you don't plan to fight fair. For a writer like Carmen, whose pay is determined by the number of page views her posts receive, this was a home run. And for a publisher like Denton, the buzz the story generated made his company more attractive to advertisers and increased the valuation of his brand. That her story was a lie didn't matter. That it was a part of a pattern of manipulation didn't matter. The women of The Daily Show published an open letter on the show's website a few days after the story hit. Women accounted for some 40% of the staff. The letter read, from writers and producers to correspondents and interns, and had over 100 years' experience on the show among them. The letter was remarkable in its clarity and understanding of what the blogger was doing. They addressed it, quote, "Dear people who don't work here," end quote, and called Carmen's piece an inadequately researched blog post that clung to a predetermined narrative about sexism at The Daily Show. If I hadn't experienced the exact situation myself, the letter would have made me hopeful that the truth would win out. But that's not how it works online. The next day, the New York Times ran an article about their response. The Daily Show women say the staff isn't sexist, the headline blared. Think about how bullshit that is. Because the Jezebel piece came first, the letter from the Daily Show women is shown merely as a response instead of the refutation that it actually was. No matter how convincing, it only reasserts in America's biggest newspaper Carmen's faulty claim of sexism on the show. They could never undo what they'd been accused of, no matter how spurious the accusation. They can only deny it, and denials don't mean anything online. Kahane? Kahane. I'm not sure. Kahani? Cooperman, a female co-executive producer at the show, told the New York Times, quote, "No one called us, no one talked to us. We felt like we work here. We should take control of the narrative," end quote. She didn't know how it works. Jezebel controls the narrative. Carmen drummed it up. No one else had a right to it. The day after the story ran, but before the women of The Daily Show could respond, Carmen got another post out of the subject. Quote, "5 unconvincing excuses for Daily Show sexism," end quote, as she titled it, dismissing in advance the criticism leveled by some concerned and skeptical commenters. It was a preemptive strike to marginalize anyone who doubted her shaky accusations and to solidify her page view hungry version of reality. In the titles of her first and second articles, you can see what she is doing. The Daily Show's woman problem from her first post became their sexism in her second. One headline bootstraps the next. The what ifs of the first piece become the basis for the second. Her story proves itself. When the New York Times asked Carmen to respond to the women of the Daily Show's claim, they were not interviewed or contacted for the story, which restated the allegations. She refused to comment further, quote unquote. Yet when the Daily Show supposedly invoked this right by not speaking to Carmen, it was evidence that they were hiding something. A double standard? Yes. Did Carmen update her piece to reflect the dozens of comments released by the Daily Show women, or at least give their response a fair shake? No, of course not. In a 40-word post, 40 words, she linked their statement with the tag open letter and whined that she just wished they'd spoken up when she was writing the story. She didn't acknowledge the letter's claim that they actually had tried to speak with her and danced over the fact that it's her job to get their side of the story before publishing, even if that's difficult or time consuming. How many Jezebel readers do you think threw out their original impression for a new one, or even saw the update? The post making the accusation did 330,000 views. Her post showing the Daily Show women's response did 10,000 views, 3% of the impressions of the first shot. Did Carmen really send repeated requests for comment to the Daily Show? A major television show like that would get hundreds of requests a week. Whom did she contact? Did she provide time for them to respond? Or is it much more likely that she gave the show a cursory heads up minutes before publication? In my experience, the answers to these questions are appalling. No wonder she wouldn't explain her methods to the Times. All I have to go on is my personal history with Carmen, and it tells me that at every juncture she does whatever will benefit her most. I've seen the values she places on the truth, particularly if it gets in the way of a big story. There is something deeply twisted about an arrangement like this one. Carmen's accusations received 5 times as many views as the posts about the Daily Show's women's response, even though the latter undermines much of the former. There is something wrong with the way the writer is compensated for both pieces, as well as the third, fourth, or fifth she managed to squeeze out of the topic. Again, more than 500,000 page views combined. Finally, there is something wrong with the fact that Denton's sites benefit merely by going toe to toe with a cultural icon like Jon Stewart, even if their reports are later discredited. They know this, it's why they do it. This is how it works online. A writer finds a narrative to advance that is profitable to them, or perhaps that they are personally or ideologically motivated to advance and are able to thrust it into the national consciousness before anyone has a chance to bother checking if it's true or not. Emily Gould, former editor of Gawker, later broke a piece for Slate entitled, quote, How Feminist Blogs Like Jezebel Gin Up Page Views by Exploiting Women's Worst Tendencies, end quote, in which she explained the motivations behind such a story. And then we have a fairly long quote here. Quote, It's a prime example of the feminist blogosphere's tendency to tap into the market force of what I've come to think of as outrage world. The regularly occurring firestorms stirred up on mainstream, for-profit, woman-targeted blogs like Jezebel, and also, to a lesser degree, Slate's own XX Factor and Salon's broadsheet. They're ignited by writers who are pushing readers to feel what the writers claim is righteously indignant rage, but which is actually just petty jealousy, cleverly marketed as feminism. These firestorms are great for page view pimping bloggy business. End quote. Let me go a step further. Writers like Erin Carmen are driven more by shrewd self-interest and disdain for the consequences than they are for jealousy. It's a pattern for Carmen, as we've seen. She's not stopping either. Just a few months later, needing to reproduce her previous success, she saw an opportunity for a similar story about producer and director Judd Apatow. After spotting him at a party, she tried to recapture the same outrage that had propelled her Daily Show piece into the public consciousness by again accusing a well-liked public figure of something impossible to deny. The actual events of the evening, director Judd Apatow attended a partly. Let me start that over. The actual events of the evening. Director Judd Apatow attended a party hosted by a friend. Carmen attempted to corner and embarrass him for a story she wanted to write but failed. Yet in the world of blogging, this becomes the headline. Judd Apatow defends his record on female characters. It did about 35,000 views and 100 comments. Carmen tried to get him and did. I guess I have to give her credit, because this time she actually talked to the person she hoped to make her scapegoat. But still, you can actually see as it happens her effort to trap Apatow with the same insinuations and controversy that she did with Stewart. In the interview, Carmen repeatedly presented personal criticisms of Apatow's movies as generally accepted fact that she was merely the conduit for, referring to his critics, quote unquote, as though she weren't speaking for herself. From the interview, question: So you think that's unfair that you've gotten this criticism? Answer: Oh, I definitely think that it's unfair, and that's okay, but that's okay. Question: I wonder if you could elaborate on your defense a little bit. Answer: I'm not defensive about it. Question: Do you do the conversation and the criticism change the way you work? Answer: I don't hear any of the criticism when I test the movies and talk to thousands of people. I think the people who talk about these things on the internet are looking to stir things up, to make for interesting reading. But when you make movies, thousands of people fill out cards telling you their intimate feelings about the movies, and those criticisms never came up, ever, on any of the movies. In other words, there is nothing to any of her claims, but the post went up anyway, and she got paid just the same. Notoriety from events of 2010 and 2011 translated into a staff position at Salon and a spot on the Forbes 30 under 30 list for Carmen. Now she's a regular on MSNBC. It all worked out very nicely for her. Okay. How one side learns from the other. In recent years, let's see, how long have we been going? 30 minutes. Okay. In recent years, political groups of all kinds have picked up this playbook and run with it. Look at how the right was able to make Hillary Clinton's health a topic of conversation during the campaign. Look at how they were able to make her emails with the Clinton Foundation appear to be major issues. Look at Pizzagate. The alt right claimed that the Democrats and Clinton were somehow associated with a mysterious international child sex trafficking ring that was being run out of a D.C. pizza restaurant. Conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones, whose fans are just as rabid as Jezebel's, if only a bit crazier, were able to repeatedly ask the same paranoid questions, make enough accusations, and eventually get enough mainstream media attention that some people began to think it was real. The tactic has come to be called concern trolling, acting like you're upset and offended in order to exploit the ethics and empathy of your opponent. For instance, in 2017, a New York Times reporter replied to tweets rapper Bow Wow made about supposedly pimping out the First Lady by joking that, quote, the outrage from at Breitbart News is going to be through the roof, and end quote. Trolls sprang into action, pretending like they were offended that a reporter would joke about sex slavery and encourage rape culture, quote unquote. Of course, the reporter had done no such thing, and more important, the trolls were precisely the kind of people who reject that there even is such a thing as rape culture. Yet they cleverly managed to direct enough faux concern that the ombudsman for the New York Times replied and reprimanded the writer. Far enough down the line, it seemed like the reporter really had said something ill advised and that people really were upset, except they weren't. The diabolicalness of this strategy is this: how were the people on the other side of these scandals supposed to respond? They were fighting against someone who wasn't fighting fair. Talking about it only gave the flimsy charges more airtime. Arguing that the other side wasn't actually offended sounds like an excuse. It was an impossible, brilliant kind of gaslighting. It was so effective and relentless that in the case of Pizzagate, a real person with a real assault rifle entered that pizza restaurant to investigate and fired real bullets into it. I'm not trying to make a political point here. Whoever is doing it, right or left, it sucks. Even if Erin's intentions had been good, even if she really thought she was making a difference, I want you to see where this kind of outrage manufacturing has left us. The manufacturers are in, indistinguishable from the publishers and bloggers. While it used to be that progressives pulled the media strings, it's clear the right has begun to figure it out as well. That wasn't balanced. That hasn't balanced things out. It's only made the truth harder to know. We're awash in manipulation and manipulators. If you don't believe me, keep reading. And that's the end of that chapter. That was a longer chapter. Okay. Um, we'll read one more chapter tonight, so we keep on with our two chapter reads. But I am going to go and refill my water before we do, and we'll get into chapter 14. There are others, the Manipulation Hall of Fame, or Manipulator Hall of Fame. So I will be right back in just a minute, just long enough to refill the glass. Okay, back to our reading. Okay, chapter 14. There are others, the Manipulator Hall of Fame. And our quote is, "We are the tools of rich men behind the scenes. We are jumping jacks. They pull the strings and we dance." By John Swinton, journalist, New York Sun, 1880. Okay. Sometimes only a manipulator can spot another manipulator's work. In figuring out how to exploit the incentive of blogs, I discovered something pretty stunning. I wasn't the only one. But where I felt I worked for companies doing good things, selling great books, selling clothes made in America, others wielded influence and power over national debates. They changed politics and upended people's lives. Remember Shirley Sherrod, the black woman who lost her job as a rural director for the U.S. Department of Agriculture after a video of her purportedly making a racist speech surfaced online? Behind it was a manipulator, a political manipulator, selling backward ideas using the same tactics that people like me use to sell products. This video caused a national shitstorm. Within hours, it had gone from one blog to dozens of blogs to cable news websites, and then to the newspapers and back again. Sherrod was forced to resign shortly after. The man who posted the video was the late Andrew Breitbart. Of course, we now know Sherrod is not a racist. In fact, the speech he was giving was about how not to be racist, but the bloggers and reporters who repeated the story were chasing a sensational story, reporting in real time using only the limited material they had been given by Breitbart, and each report became more extreme and confident than the last, despite the lack of any new evidence to support their stories. It was an embarrassing moment in modern politics, which says a lot. The fiasco ended with then President Obama denouncing his own administration's premature rush to judgment and apologizing personally to Sherrod. He lamented to Good Morning America, quote, "We now live in this media culture where something goes up on YouTube or a blog and everybody scrambles," end quote. Breitbart was the master of making people scramble. Whenever I need to understand the mind of blogging, I try to picture Andrew Breitbart sitting down at his computer to edit and publish that video, because he was not a racist either, nor was he the partisan kook the left mistook him for. He was a media manipulator just like me. He understood and embodied the economics of the web better than anyone, and in some ways I envy him because he was able to do it without the guilt that drove me to write this book. Breitbart was the first employee of the Drudge Report and a founding employee of the Huffington Post. He helped build the dominant conservative and liberal blogs. He wasn't simply an ideologue, he was an expert on what spreads, a provocateur. From his perspective, the wide discrediting of his Sherrod video was not a failure, not even close. The Sherrod story put him on his blog and his blog on the lips in anger and in awe of nearly every media outlet in the country. Sherrod was just collateral damage. The political machine was a plaything for Breitbart, and he made it do just what he wanted, dance and give him attention. He'd never confess as much, so I'll do it for him. Breitbart teed up the story perfectly by splitting the edited Sherrod clips into two pieces, 2 minutes 30 seconds and 1 minute 6 seconds, respectively. He made it quick to consume and easy for bloggers to watch and republish. Since the unedited clip is 43 minutes long, it was doubtful anyone would sit through the whole thing to rain on his parade. The post was titled Video Proof the NAACP Awards Racism, and he spent most of his 1,300 words fighting the imaginary foil of efforts to suppress the Tea Party instead of explaining where the video came from. For all the complaints from blogs, cable channels, and newspapers about being misled, Breitbart had actually given them a highly profitable gift. In getting to report on his accusations and then the reversal and then the discussion about the Breitbart slash Sherrod controversy, quote unquote, news outlets actually got 3 major stories instead of one. Most stories last only a few minutes, but the Sherrod controversy lasted nearly a week. It's still good for follow-ups today. Better than anyone, Breitbart understood that the media doesn't mind being played because they get something out of it, namely page views, ratings, and readers. Breitbart, who died suddenly of heart failure in early 2012, might not be with us any longer, but it hardly matters. As he once said, quote, "Feeding the media is like training a dog. You can't throw an entire steak at a dog to train it to sit. You might give it little bits of steak over and over again until it learns," end quote. Breitbart did plenty of training in his short time on the scene. Today, one of the dog's masters is gone, sure, but the dog still responds to the same commands. The master and his proteges. A system can tolerate a few bad actors. The problem is when those bad actors spawn replicants, and that is sadly the case with Breitbart. Not only has Breitbart News managed to survive Breitbart's passing, but the site is arguably stronger than ever. In fact, the site's publisher, Steve Bannon, became a top advisor to Donald Trump. Breitbart's fingerprints were all over the 2016 election, smudging the truth until it became impossible to see. Aside from Steve Bannon, the legacy of Breitbart lives on in a number of younger media manipulators like James O'Keefe and Charles Johnson. Take the young O'Keefe, who was mentored and funded by Breitbart early on and later had some of his legal bills picked up by Trump supporters. O'Keefe is responsible for several stories nearly as big as the charade piece. He posed as a pimp in a set of undercover videos that supposedly show the now defunct community activist group Acorn giving advice to the pimp on how to avoid paying taxes. He recorded NPR seemingly showing its willingness to conceal the source of a large donation from a Muslim group. Once he even planned a bizarre attempt to seduce an attractive CNN correspondent on camera in order to embarrass the station. Like Breitbart's clips, O'Keefe's work is heavily and disingenuously edited, far beyond what the context and actual events would support. His clips spread quickly because they are perfectly designed to suit a specific and vocal group, angry Republicans. By pre-fitting the narrative to appeal to conservative bloggers, his sensational stories quickly overwhelm the atrophied verification and accountability muscles of the rest of the media and become real stories. And even when they don't, as was the case with the CNN story, it's still enough to get their names in the news. O'Keefe learned from Breitbart that in the blogging market there is a profound shortage of investigative material or original reporting. It's just too expensive to produce. So rather than bear those costs, O'Keefe O'Keefe's stories are hollow shells, an edited clip of faux investigation that blogs can use as a substitute for the real thing. Then he watches as the media falls over itself to propagate it as quickly as possible. Short, shocking narratives with a reusable soundbite are all it takes. Because they assume the cloak of the persecuted underdog, the inevitable backlash helps O'Keefe and Breitbart rather than hurting them. Nearly all of O'Keefe's stories have been exposed as doctored to some extent. When forced to reveal the unedited footage of the NPR and Acorn stunts, most of the main accusations were found to have been amplified or manipulated. But by that point, the victims had already lost their jobs or been publicly branded. For instance, the Acorn clip shows O'Keefe wearing a comical pimp hat, a fur coat, and a cane to the meetings, when in reality he wore a suit and tie. He'd edited in frames with the other costume after the fact. By the time this was exposed 6 months later, the pimp image was indelibly stuck in people's minds, and the only effect of the discovery was to put O'Keefe's name back in the news. Being caught as a manipulator can only help make you more famous. Charles Johnson is another media manipulator. I can't rest all the blame for him on Breitbart, as Charles has several times said that my book was influential in his development as a political provocateur and troll. I hope my writing had nothing to do with Charles's decision to try to personally impugn Michael Brown, the teenager killed by police in Ferguson, Missouri, or his obsession with trying to prove that Obama is gay. When I asked him about his fascination with race, he gave me a bunch of theories about how blacks are not as intelligent as whites and possibly more prone to violence, which to me is real racism and much more serious than politically incorrect language. In any case, Charles has developed a serious track record of inserting controversial discussion points in the media and claims to have the ear of many powerful politicians and writers. Even if this isn't true, his attempts to stir things up are verifiable and have real impact. Below is an email exchange that he forwarded me unsolicited in 2017 that he had with the Daily Beast reporter Gideon Resnick, where Johnson tried to confess that he had fabricated the controversial Trump dossier. Okay, so the email from Charles Johnson, date Tuesday, January 10, 2017 at 11:50 p.m. to Resnick Gideon. Subject: Confession. My friends placed the fake news with BuzzFeed. On Tuesday, January 10, 2017, Resnick Gideon wrote, "Huh, tell me more." On Tuesday, January 10, 2017, Charles Johnson wrote, "My friends targeted BuzzFeed because they knew that they would fall for it because they have no journalistic integrity. The piss stuff R.E. Trump is in reference to this." and then there's a URL. Um, Rick Wilson attacked alt-right. They went after his son and found Pimp Feet. His high school son was posting raunchy erotica stuff. Though I wasn't involved, I love the creativity of people, including Golden Showers. If Rick Wilson was involved with his son in advocating for pissing in women's mouths last year, calling for sadistic scat play, it's perfect someone turned that back on him. Rick Wilson's career is now over, and Ben Smith needs to resign as editor in chief of BuzzFeed's news division. And that's the end of all of the email, or email string, I guess. I don't have any reason to suspect that the dossier was fake or placed by Johnson, but you can see why a reporter might. It's in their interest to print something like that, or to print that someone is claiming that, just as it was in their interest to run the unverified dossier in the first place. Johnson also runs a site called WeSearcher.com, which puts up crowd-funded bounties on information and leaks. The site is really just a vehicle for trolling. Their campaigns raise money for information that proves certain politicians are gay, or for evidence that Obama used a ghostwriter for his best-selling memoirs. They raised north of $5,000 to find criminal acts, quote unquote, committed by Gawker publisher Nick Denton, and $10,000 to secure audio recordings of John McCain producing propaganda for the North Vietnamese. Even if these claims are dubious and ridiculous, that's not the point. The manipulation is that by raising money to look for them, Johnson and his supporters are repeating the claims and giving them weight. Beating them at their own game. Andrew Breitbart did eventually issue a correction to the widely disproved Sherrod story. He was so wrong that the backlash was so strong he had to, but he remained defiant. At the top of the article, quote, correction. While Miss Sherrod made the remarks captured in the first video, featured in this post while she held a federally appointed position, the story she tells refers to actions she took before she held that federal position. End quote. A bullshit correction, to say the least. Sherrod's attempt to clear her name and later to sue Breitbart for libel and slander were just other chances for him to bluster. The press release Breitbart issued was an exercise in defiant misdirection. Quote, Andrew Breitbart on Pigford lawsuit. Bring it on, end quote. It's exactly what I would have advised him to do if he asked me. In fact, I've basically done the exact same thing, only I was a bit more vulgar. Remember, I'm the guy who put out a press release with the headline, Tucker Max responds to CTA decision, blow me. I did that because the best way to make your critics work for you is to make them irrationally angry. Blinded by rage or indignation, they spread your message to every ear and media outlet they can find. Breitbart telling his haters to bring it on certainly accomplished this, as did completely sidestepping the Sherrod issue and pretending this was some giant political conspiracy about reparations for slavery. In refusing to acknowledge even in the slightest that she might have been innocent of everything he accused her of, Breitbart played it like an old pro. This is what opponents of the alt-right seem to miss. They are trying to make you upset. They want you to be irrationally angry. It's how they win. Most brands and personalities try to appeal to a wide swath of the population. Niche players and polarizing personalities are only ever going to be interesting to a small subgroup. While this might seem like a disadvantage, it's actually a huge opportunity because it allows them to leverage the dismissals, anger, mockery, and contempt of the population at large as proof of their credibility. Someone like Andrew Breitbart or Milo Yiannopoulos or Charles Johnson doesn't care that you hate them. They like it. It's proof to their followers that they are doing something subversive and meaningful. It gives their followers something to talk about. It imbues the whole movement with a sense of urgency and action. It creates purpose and meaning. The only way to beat them is by controlling your reaction and letting them embarrass themselves, as they inevitably will. I told you earlier about the violent protests of Milo at UC Berkeley. While those adults and college students are adults were flipping out and acting like babies, a 16-year-old girl in Canada simply did some research. She found some utterly indefensible comments Milo had made about pedophilia and leaked them to a conservative group, and within a few days Milo had lost his book deal and his job at Breitbart, no less. The irony could not have been sweeter for some. If you can put aside your anger, if you can put aside the unfortunate fate that befell Sherrod, you can see what masterful music Breitbart and O'Keefe are able to play on the instruments of online media. When they sit down to publish on their blogs, they are not simply political extremists, but ruthless seekers of attention. From this attention comes fame and profit, a platform for best-selling books, lucrative speaking and consulting gigs, donations, and millions of dollars in online advertising revenue. Their subtle felonies against the truth are deliberate and premeditated. The way to beat them is not by freaking out, it's by beating them at their own game, and sooner is better, because every day we wait, there is more collateral damage. And that is the end of that chapter. And I have to say, he might be right as far as Breitbart and O'Keefe go, but I do have to also say he didn't really mention a whole lot of what the left has done, and they have done some of the most blatant manipulation, and they're still pushing some of the same narratives because people on the left still believe them, even though they're easily debunked. One of them, the easiest example to bring up is the Charlottesville speech that Trump did, where he said there were very fine people on both sides, and that's all they tell you. And they say he was praising white supremacists. No, actually, if you just watch a little bit longer clip, you know he said, and I'm not talking about the white nationalists and neo-Nazis, or however exactly he said it. I've got it somewhere, but and they're still pushing it. They were still pushing it in this last election. Obama pushed it. Biden pushed it. And it's the exact same thing, but they just keep rehashing it because people won't bother to go and look at the video, the whole video, or even just a slightly longer clip. So, but he didn't mention any of that. He was going on after more of the conservative side, but whatever. Or the alt-right side, whatever that even means. So anyway, that's that for this time around. I raided somebody last night, so I'm not going to raid tonight. I'm just going to close it out, and I will see you all in the next reading. Have a good night.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not nights like I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. Just tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. sophisticated into love relations. No disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. So tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing, but feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not much luck I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. No disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. So tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing, but not much luck I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. No disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. So tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing, but feeling shattered skies, watching tears